3 months ago, I was a dentist trusted by the entire town of Burlington. People used to call me the Smile Doctor because I worked late into the night, fixed teeth for children for free, and believed that as long as you lived kindly, good things would come back to you. I believed that until life itself uprooted that belief. In just a few weeks, I lost everything. My wife, who once promised to walk through life with me, accused me of having an affair with a patient. My clinic was shut down. My reputation was tarnished. Friends turned their backs on me, and I, once a respected doctor, became an outcast, homeless, wandering with my old pickup truck as my only remaining shelter. I thought it was all over, until that night, when a man in a black suit approached me introducing himself as Spencer Hale, a lawyer. He placed a thick envelope on the table and said, "Mr. Pembroke, your great-uncle has passed away. He left you his entire estate, over $80 million. I stared at him, thinking I must have misheard. But no, it was all true, and that was the beginning of a new chapter, where truth, justice, and kindness were tested once again. Hello, my name is Calvin Pembroke. I'm 33 years old, living in Burlington, Vermont, a small town nestled by Lake Champlain, where snow blankets the hills in winter and the streets glow with golden leaves in autumn. If you ask me who I am, I'd say I'm a dentist, but not just someone who fixes teeth. I live to do what's right, to bring smiles back to those who've forgotten how. My philosophy is simple. Do right, do kind. It might sound cliché, but it's been my guiding principle since the day my father died of a heart attack when I was 15. That day, standing by his hospital bed, holding his hand tightly, I promised myself I'd live a meaningful life. My clinic, Pembroke Dental, sits on a small street in Burlington, where white-painted wooden houses line up neatly and church bells ring every Sunday morning. The clinic isn't big, just enough space for 2 dental chairs, a small reception desk, and a waiting area with a few outdated magazines. But I loved that place. Every day I welcomed patients from all walks of life, from shy children visiting the dentist for the first time to elderly folks sharing life stories in trembling voices. I often lowered fees, sometimes treating people for free for those who couldn't afford care. Once, an elderly woman named Martha, living on Social Security, hugged me tightly after I fixed her broken front tooth for free. "You gave me my smile back, Calvin," she said, her eyes brimming with tears. In that moment, I knew I'd chosen the right path. But life wasn't just about the clinic. I had Lydia, my wife, and Eli, our little boy. Lydia was the bright light in my life, or at least I used to think so. She's 30, the daughter of Richard Alden, a powerful businessman in Burlington. Lydia grew up in luxury, but she wasn't as haughty as people might assume of a rich man's daughter. We met at a free dental checkup event for the community. I was treating a homeless boy's teeth when Lydia stood there, in an elegant blue dress, watching me with a strange look. Half admiration, half curiosity. "You're not like any man I've ever met," she said, and I blushed, unsure how to respond. We married after a year of dating, and Eli was born 2 years later. Eli is my entire world. He just turned 5 this year, with curly blonde hair like his mother and deep brown eyes like mine. Eli is sensitive, smart, and clings to me like a shadow. Every evening when I came home from the clinic, he'd run to the door, hug my legs tightly, and shout, "Dad's home! Tell me a superhero story." I'd scoop him up and spin tales about a superhero dentist flying around the world to fix kids' teeth. Lydia would stand at the kitchen door smiling at us, but looking back now, her smile always seemed to carry a hint of distance. From the outside, our life looked perfect. A small family, a cozy wooden house with a white picket fence, a devoted husband, a talented wife, and an adorable son. But beneath the surface, cracks were starting to show. Small, but enough to jolt me awake in the middle of the night, wondering if everything was as stable as I thought. Lydia worked in PR and event coordination. She was a sharp woman, always knowing how to draw attention. She cared about her image, sometimes to the point where I felt she lived to meet society's standards. She loved lavish dinner parties, designer dresses, and handshakes with the elite. I didn't judge. That was her world and I respected it. The trouble started with how we viewed work. To me, the clinic wasn't just a place to earn money. It was where I kept my promise to myself, to do what's right, to do what's kind. I often spent Saturdays offering free checkups for kids from shelters or discounting services for low-income workers. Those moments made me feel I was living true to my ideals. But Lydia didn't see it that way. She called it a lack of ambition. Once over dinner, when I shared a story about helping a patient who couldn't afford treatment, she blurted out, "Calvin, you can't keep giving things away like that. You're talented. Why not expand the clinic, hire more doctors, make more money? You're letting opportunities slip through your fingers." I went quiet, unsure how to respond. I wanted to say that money wasn't everything, that every smile I brought to a patient's face was worth more than any lucrative deal. But I just smiled, nodded, and changed the subject. I didn't want to argue, didn't want to sour the mood, but those words, small as they were like pebbles dropped into a still lake, creating ripples I couldn't control. Over time, I realized Lydia and I were walking different paths. She wanted me to be a successful man in her terms, to expand the clinic, network with influential people, and earn enough to match her family's status. But I just wanted to be Calvin Pembroke, the dentist in Burlington, the one patients called by name and hugged as they left the clinic. I thought love would be enough to bridge our differences, that if I was patient, Lydia would understand. But I was wrong. As the days passed, I began to feel the distance between Lydia and me. Not a glaring void, but something like a thin, hazy mist, subtle yet enough to blur everything. Lydia was home less often. She frequently cited charity projects or meetings with partners as reasons for her absence. In the evenings, when Eli and I sat in the living room playing with Legos or reading books, she'd call to say she had to stay late at the office or attend an important event that dragged on into the night. I wasn't the suspicious type, but I started noticing small details. Her phone, which she used to leave carelessly on the table, was now always face down, its screen quickly locked whenever I entered the room. Once I walked by while she was texting and she hurriedly pressed the lock button, her eyes darting away. "Just work," she said, her voice slightly higher than usual, as if hiding something. I tried not to overthink it. Maybe she was genuinely busy, I told myself. Lydia had always been a workaholic, and her job coordinating charity events demanded a lot of time, especially when dealing with wealthy donors and powerful figures in Burlington. But the change in her demeanor was impossible to ignore. Lydia became irritable, distant, as if Eli and I were mere inconveniences in her busy life. Whenever I mentioned Eli, how he missed his mom, or asked when she could take him to the park, she'd brush it off with, "Honey, I'm swamped. Maybe this weekend." But when the weekend came, there'd be another meeting, another event, and Eli would sit by the window staring out at the street, waiting for his mom to come home. Then our first real fight erupted on a Friday evening. I came home early, hoping to surprise Lydia. I'd made a reservation at a small restaurant we used to love, thinking a date night might bring us closer. When I walked into the house, Lydia was on the sofa, phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, carrying an intimacy I hadn't heard from her in a long time. "Yeah, I know. No, don't worry, I'll figure it out." She looked up, saw me standing at the door, and her face froze. She ended the call abruptly, nearly dropping the phone. "Who was that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, but my heart was pounding. "Just work," she replied, her tone icy. "A partner? What kind of partner calls at this hour?" I couldn't hold back. The words spilled out before I could think. Lydia shot up from the sofa, her eyes flashing with anger. "Calvin, what are you doing? Suspecting me? I'm just trying to maintain work relationships, and you think I'm what, cheating?" Her voice rose sharply, as if I'd deeply offended her. I was stunned. I hadn't even thought of the word cheating until she said it. "That's not what I meant," I said, trying to defuse the situation. I just want to know if you're okay. You've been so busy lately and I'm worried." But Lydia wasn't listening. She turned away, crossing her arms as if shielding herself. "You're always like this, Calvin. Always thinking I'm doing something wrong. I'm tired of having to explain everything." She stormed into the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. I stood there in the living room feeling like I'd been slapped. I didn't want to fight, didn't want to push her further away, but her words, her reaction only deepened my unease. Was I really being paranoid? Or was I seeing things she didn't want me to know? Eli started to sense the tension. One evening while I was bathing him, he looked up at me, his big brown eyes wide. "Dad, is Mom mad at you?" I hugged him, trying to suppress the ache in my chest. "No, buddy. Mom's just busy. She loves you so much." But as I looked at my tired reflection in the mirror, I knew I was lying. Not just to Eli, but to myself. Every night when Lydia came home late, I'd hear her footsteps, the jingle of her keys, and the sound of her quietly slipping into the bathroom. I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to summon the image of the woman who once looked at me with admiration, who said I was the most remarkable man she'd ever met. But all I could see was the growing distance, the secrets she wouldn't share. I tried to hold on, tried to believe it was all a misunderstanding, that our love was strong enough to overcome this. But then, the thing I feared most came crashing down like a storm, sweeping away everything I thought was forever. That morning, a crisp early winter morning when snow began to fall lightly on the streets of Burlington, everything fell apart. I returned from the clinic with a heavy heart. Eli had been at daycare all day, and I planned to pick him up early so we could have dinner together. But when I opened the door, the house was eerily silent. No sound of Eli's laughter, no patter of feet running to greet me as usual. On the kitchen table, a white envelope lay alone, bearing Lydia's firm handwriting. I opened it and my heart seemed to stop. It was a divorce petition. The cold, stark words declared that she wanted to end our marriage because I had mentally abused her and engaged in improper relationships with patients. I read it over and over as if unable to believe my eyes. Abuse? Improper relationships? The words stabbed into my chest like knives. I called Lydia, but her phone rang and went to voicemail. I sent message after message begging her to talk, to explain what was happening. No response. When I drove to the daycare to pick up Eli, the teacher looked at me with pity. "Lydia picked him up this morning," she said. She mentioned taking Eli away for a few days. I stood there in the schoolyard feeling the ground collapse beneath me. Lydia hadn't just left. She'd taken Eli, my only light, with her. In the days that followed, rumors spread like wildfire. I don't know how Lydia did it, but she'd managed to paint herself as the victim before I could even process what was happening. On social media, her PR friends began posting cryptic statuses. One wrote, "Some men hide behind a mask of morality, but behind it lies a monster." Another post, accompanied by a photo of me treating a female patient at the clinic, insinuated that I was exploiting patients to conceal my true nature. With her PR expertise, Lydia had woven a perfect narrative. I was an abusive, volatile man who attacked her in fits of rage. God, I had never so much as raised a hand to her, not even a slight push. But the truth no longer seemed to matter. Public opinion had already sided with Lydia. I opened my phone and scrolled through the comments online. "Dr. Pembroke, who would have thought he was two-faced?" one person wrote. "So scary. I used to take my kids to his clinic." Another commented. Regular patients, the ones who once hugged me in gratitude, began canceling appointments. The clinic grew quiet, with only the hum of the air conditioner filling the cold, empty space. Local medical organizations sent letters informing me that they were suspending collaboration with me, pending investigation. I tried reaching Lydia, calling, texting, even going to her office. But she had vanished without a trace. Amid the storm of public opinion, another figure emerged, adding fuel to the fire. Richard Alden, Lydia's father. A powerful businessman and chairman of Alden Holdings, he had always looked at me with cold eyes, as if I were unworthy of entering his world. From the moment we married, Richard never hid his belief that I wasn't good enough for his daughter. A small-time dentist with a modest income, how could I compare to the powerful men he wanted Lydia to marry? When the scandal broke, Richard immediately stepped in to protect his daughter. He appeared on a local TV channel dressed in a flawless gray suit, his voice calm but sharp. "I can't stand by and watch my daughter be abused," he said, staring directly into the camera. "We will do everything to protect Lydia and my grandson." His credibility and vast network of connections tipped the scales entirely in Lydia's favor. Me, an ordinary dentist. How could I possibly compete? I chose silence. Not because I didn't want to fight back, but because I believed the truth would speak for itself. I sent a brief letter to the court asserting my innocence, stating that I had never abused Lydia or done anything against my ethics. But my silence only fueled the rumors further. Every day I received anonymous texts and calls from unknown numbers, berating me as a traitor or hypocrite. One morning when I stepped outside, I found my doorstep plastered with flyers bearing red text: "Traitor doctor, wife and child abuser." I stood there frozen as the cold wind made the papers flutter. I stared at them, each word cutting into me like a blade. This was no longer a misunderstanding. This was a meticulously orchestrated war, and I, unprepared, had been cast as the villain. I went back inside, sank onto the sofa, and tried to breathe deeply. The house, once filled with Eli's laughter and cozy family dinners, was now an empty shell. I thought of my son, his clear brown eyes, and my heart twisted in pain. I wanted to hold Eli, to tell him his dad wasn't that kind of person, that I loved him more than anything in the world. But I couldn't. Lydia had taken him, and I was cut off from his world. That night I sat in the living room, the dim light casting shadows on the family photos hanging on the wall. One picture showed Lydia and me on our wedding day, her radiant in a white dress, me gazing at her like she was my entire world. Another captured Eli at 3 years old, perched on my shoulders in the park, grinning ear to ear. I wanted to cry, but I couldn't. No tears came, only a dry, choking pain in my throat. I had tried to build a family, a decent life, but now everything was crumbling, and I didn't know how to salvage it. The next day, a brown envelope was slipped under the door. I opened it, and like a punch to the chest, it was a letter from the Vermont Dental Board notifying me that my license to practice was temporarily suspended. They had called an emergency meeting based on Lydia's complaint and the rumors spreading on social media. During the investigation, the letter stated, "Dr. Calvin Pembroke is prohibited from practicing dentistry." I read it over and over, my hands trembling as if the words might change if I stared long enough. But they remained there, cold and merciless, like a verdict. That same day, another notice arrived from the court. My visitation rights to Eli were temporarily revoked, citing ensuring the child's safety. I stood in the living room holding both papers, feeling as though the entire world had turned its back on me. The clinic, which I once called my second home, quickly became a distant memory. Patients canceled appointments en masse. Some whom I had treated for free called demanding refunds, their voices laced with suspicion and anger. "I don't want to be associated with someone like you," one said over the phone before hanging up. My staff, who used to joke with me every morning, began resigning one by one. "I'm sorry, Calvin," said Jane, the receptionist who had worked with me for 3 years, her eyes fixed on the floor. "I need a stable job." I nodded, forcing a smile, but my heart felt crushed. The worst blow came when Alden Holdings, Richard Alden's company, announced the early termination of my clinic's lease. That morning I stood watching as they took down the Pembroke Dental sign, each letter falling to the ground like fragments of the dream I had built. I wanted to scream, to smash something, but I just stood there, powerless, as snowflakes drifted around me. My finances dwindled rapidly. I still had to pay off loans for dental equipment, insurance, and the temporary alimony the court ordered me to send to Lydia. I tried to save, cutting every expense, but my bank account drained like water slipping through my fingers. One day I stood in front of a pawn shop holding the old watch my father had left me, a gift he gave me before he passed. "Keep it, son," he had said. "It'll remind you how precious time is." I swallowed hard, pushed open the door, and left with a few $100s. Next was my laptop, then my car, my faithful companion for years. When I handed the keys to the buyer, it felt like I was selling a piece of my soul. Social isolation came faster than I expected. Friends who once came over for dinner, who laughed with Lydia and me, now avoided me. Former colleagues didn't respond to my messages. I walked through the neighborhood, hearing whispers behind my back, seeing curious and disdainful glances from neighbors. I tried applying to other clinics, but no one would hire me. "We don't want the risk," one manager said bluntly. I became an outcast, a name branded as a villain in the town that once called me the kind doctor. I moved out of the wooden house, now just a painful memory. With what little money I had left, I rented a cheap motel room on the outskirts of Burlington, where the smell of old cigarette smoke clung to the walls and the rumble of pickup trucks echoed every night. I lived frugally, sleeping little, eating sparingly, mostly bread and cheap coffee from a convenience store. But every morning I still shaved neatly and wore a clean shirt, as if clinging to my last shred of dignity. I looked at myself in the mirror, trying to smile, but the man staring back was merely a shadow of who I used to be. In those dark days, my mother, Ruth Pembroke, was the only light left. She lived alone in a small wooden house in rural Maine, a home she and my father had built together. She was a gentle, upright woman who always believed kindness would triumph over everything. When my father died of a heart attack, she was my rock, teaching me that even if the world turns its back, you must stand tall. She called to check on me, her warm voice coming through the phone. "Calvin, are you okay? Been busy lately?" I bit my lip, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm fine, Mom. Just busy with the clinic. How about you?" I lied, not wanting her to worry, not wanting her to know that the son she was so proud of was now living like a failure. She believed me, chuckling softly over the phone. "Take a break. Don't work too hard." I nodded, though she couldn't see, and hung up with a heavy heart. But even the motel wasn't a place I could stay long. One evening, after a day of wandering in search of work, the motel owner was waiting at my door. "You're 3 weeks behind on rent," he said, his voice flat. "Pay up or get out." I tried to explain, promising to pay soon, but he just shook his head and tossed my suitcase outside. I stood in the rain, staring at my soaked belongings, feeling as though my last bit of dignity had been stripped away. I dragged the suitcase to my old pickup truck, the only thing I still had. I climbed into the seat, curled up under a thin blanket, and listened to the rain patter on the roof. In the darkness, I opened the suitcase and pulled out my yellow dental degree, its wooden frame cracked at one corner. I ran my fingers over it, remembering the day I received it, when my mother hugged me, beaming with pride. Now I was just a homeless man, sleeping in a truck in the rain, holding a useless diploma. That night, the rain fell relentlessly, as if the sky were crying for me. I lay in the truck, listening to the water tap against the windows, feeling as though I'd hit rock bottom. In just a few months, I had gone from a respected doctor, a husband, a father, to an outcast shunned by the town. I thought of Eli, his clear eyes, and wondered if he missed his dad, if he believed the lies about me. I thought of my mother, her wooden house in Maine, and my heart ached, imagining how devastated she'd be if she knew the truth. I closed my eyes, trying to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. Only the pain, cold and sharp, clung to me like an inseparable companion. In the days that followed, I fell into homelessness, a word I never imagined would apply to me. My old pickup truck, the last remnant of my possessions, became my makeshift home. Each night I parked in a secluded corner near the edge of the forest where the streetlights couldn't reach, and curled up under a tattered, thin blanket. Burlington's winter nights were bone-chillingly cold, my breath fogging up the truck's windows. I hugged myself tightly, trying to hold on to some warmth. But the cold wasn't just from the weather. It came from within, from an emptiness that felt like the entire world had turned its back on me. My life had become a series of bleak, dragging days. No job, no friends, no place to call home. Each morning I woke to the sound of wind whistling through the cracks in the truck's doors, my body stiff from sleeping in a cramped position. I'd leave the truck and walk the streets of Burlington, once as familiar as my own breath, now an alien maze. I took odd jobs, washing dishes at diners, shoveling snow from shop doorways, or even picking up trash in the park, just to scrape together a few dollars for bread or a hot cup of coffee. Once a diner owner looked at me, his eyes flickering with pity. "You used to be a doctor, didn't you?" he asked. I nodded, said nothing, and turned away before he could ask more. I didn't want to revisit the past, didn't want to face the person I used to be. The rainy nights were the worst. The patter of rain on the truck's roof was like a wordless, mournful song, pulling me back to memories I tried to bury. I thought of Pembroke Dental, once alive, with the laughter of patients and the gentle voice of Jane, the receptionist. I remembered Saturday mornings when I provided free checkups for kids from shelters, watching them beam as they looked in the mirror at their newly fixed teeth. I thought of Martha, the elderly woman who hugged me tightly after I repaired her front tooth, calling me a gift from God. All those moments, everything I had worked to preserve, had vanished in just a few months, as if they had never existed. I lived like that day after day amidst the cold streets of Burlington. All I had left was my old pickup truck, a yellowed diploma, and a broken heart. One late winter afternoon, as the sunset painted Lake Champlain in shades of red, I parked my truck on a narrow road near the shore. The cold wind carried the scent of salt and the sharp bite of Vermont's winter. I sat in the driver's seat, staring at the shimmering water, my hand gripping my phone tightly. I had opened my mother's contact, Ruth's number, a dozen times, but each time my finger hesitated. I wanted to call and tell her I'd come visit, but I couldn't. I told myself that once I found a job, once I got back on my feet, I'd go see her, head held high as she'd taught me. But today, like every day, I just sat there, lost in a tangle of thoughts with no way out. Then a knock on the window startled me. I looked up to see a tall, lean man standing outside, dressed in a neatly tailored gray suit. He didn't look like someone from Burlington, too polished, too refined for these rustic streets. I rolled down the window, slightly wary. "Dr. Calvin Pembroke?" he asked, his voice deep and clear. I nodded, my heart racing. No one had called me doctor since my license was suspended. "I'm Spencer Hale," he continued, handing me a pristine white business card. "Attorney representing Mr. Dean Pembroke, your mother's brother, your great-uncle." I froze, as if I'd heard words from another world. "Great-uncle? Dean Pembroke?" I repeated, my voice hoarse. My mother had never mentioned a brother named Dean. All I knew was that she grew up in a small family, and my father was the only person she spoke of with love and regret. Spencer Hale gave a faint smile, as if he'd anticipated my reaction. "I understand your surprise, but Mr. Dean left something for you. May I come in to discuss?" I opened the door, inviting him to the passenger seat. In the cramped space of the pickup truck, the smell of stale coffee and musty blankets made me self-conscious, but Spencer didn't seem bothered. He pulled a sealed envelope from his briefcase, marked with the words "To Calvin Pembroke," in bold, confident handwriting. "Mr. Dean passed away 3 weeks ago," Spencer said, his voice softening. "He left you his entire estate and company shares, valued at over $80 million. And this is a letter he wrote specifically for you." I took the envelope, my hands trembling so much I nearly dropped it. $80 million? Dean Pembroke? It felt like a dream, but the cold seat of the truck and Spencer's serious gaze grounded me in reality. "I've never heard of him," I whispered, my voice faltering. "My mother. She never mentioned a brother." Spencer nodded, as if prepared for the question. "Open the letter, Calvin. It will explain everything." I tore open the envelope, my heart pounding. Inside was a thick sheet of paper, handwritten, its neat lines filled with emotion. I began reading, and each sentence, each word unveiled a world I had never known. "Calvin, my nephew," the letter began. "By the time you read this, I will no longer be in this world. I am Dean Pembroke, your mother Ruth's brother. You may have never heard of me, and I don't blame you. Life tore me away from our family, but now I want to make amends in the only way I can. Dean recounted how he was a U.S. veteran who served in the Vietnam War. An explosion left him with severe PTSD and memory loss, severing his ties with his family. Everyone, including my mother, believed he had died. But Dean survived, wandering through years of solitude, unsure of his own identity. He worked his way up from manual labor to a successful entrepreneur in transportation and real estate, building an empire worth tens of millions. Yet he never forgot the feeling of being forgotten, left behind by the world. "Months before my death," he wrote, "I began recovering my memories through treatment. I remembered Ruth, my little sister, who used to sing folk songs every evening. I returned to Maine and reunited with her after over 40 years. It was the happiest day of my life. And through Ruth, I learned about you, Calvin, the dentist who lives for kindness, who lost everything but still holds on to an honest heart." I paused, tears welling up. Dean had been watching me secretly without my knowledge. He wrote that he had visited Pembroke Dental, posing as an ordinary patient to get his teeth checked. "You wouldn't remember me," he wrote, "but I remember the look in your eyes when you spoke to a poor patient, the look of someone who believes kindness can change the world." He knew about my broken marriage, Lydia's accusations, and how the community had turned against me. And he wrote that he was proud of me for not bowing to adversity. "I have a son," the letter continued, "but he is unworthy of what I leave behind. He is greedy, ungrateful, living only for himself. So I choose you, Calvin. You are the only heir who carries the Pembroke spirit, the spirit of kindness and integrity. I leave my entire estate to you, but with one condition. You must care for your mother, Ruth, for the rest of her life and use part of the fortune to help those forgotten by society, veterans, orphans, people like I once was." I folded the letter, tears streaming down my cheeks. For the first time in months, I felt a faint glimmer of light piercing the darkness. Spencer Hale, sitting beside me, gently placed a hand on my shoulder. "I know this is hard to believe, Calvin," he said, "but Mr. Dean prepared everything meticulously. This is a legal will, and I'll help you complete the inheritance process. Here's my card. Come to my office in Chicago when you're ready." I held the business card, my mind reeling. $80 million? An uncle I never knew? I looked out at the lake, where the sunset was fading, and felt as though life had just opened a new path. But I wasn't sure if I had the strength to walk it. I thought of my mother, of her emotional reunion with Dean, and my heart warmed. But I was also afraid this was just a dream, that I'd wake up with nothing but my old truck and yellowed diploma. That night I lay in the truck, Dean's letter beside me. I read it again, line by line, as if to etch it into my heart. I thought of my mother, of Eli, of the patients I had helped. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a spark of hope, small but fierce, like a tiny flame burning in the cold night. I closed my eyes, letting the tears fall, and whispered to myself, "Just survive, Calvin. Just survive. And this time live to do what's right." I woke up as the first light of dawn filtered through the truck's window, casting a pale glow over the yellowed diploma. I looked outside, seeing Lake Champlain shimmering under the early morning light, and a decision struck me, clear as the church bells ringing through Burlington's cold air. I had to see my mother. I couldn't keep hiding, couldn't let her live in worry without knowing the truth. Dean's letter, with its heartfelt words, gave me a reason to stand up, to face her, not as a failure, but as a son carrying a story never told. I gathered the few belongings left in my suitcase and checked the money in my wallet, just enough for gas to get to Maine. The old pickup truck groaned as I started it, but it rolled forward, carrying me away from Burlington, away from streets that were once home, now only painful memories. The road to Maine stretched over 200 miles, winding through snow-dusted pine forests and quiet small towns. I drove in silence, with only the crackling radio playing old folk songs. With each mile, my heart felt a little lighter, as if I were returning to a part of myself I had lost. When I pulled up to my mother's wooden house in rural Maine, the sun was dipping toward the west, bathing the surrounding fields in golden light. The house was just as I remembered. A weathered, gray-tiled roof, a porch with an old rocking chair and smoke drifting lazily from the chimney. I stepped out of the truck, suitcase in hand, feeling like a child returning after being lost. I knocked, my heart pounding. The door opened, and there was my mother in her familiar blue sweater, her silver hair neatly tied back. She froze, her brown eyes widening. "Calvin!" she exclaimed, her voice trembling. "Why didn't you tell me you were coming? I thought you were so busy." I smiled, trying to hide the exhaustion and invisible scars on my heart. "I wanted to surprise you," I said, my voice hoarse. She pulled me inside, hugging me tightly, and I felt her warmth, the faint smell of cookies wafting from the kitchen. But as she looked into my eyes, I knew she sensed something was wrong. "You've gotten thinner," she said, touching my cheek. "What's going on, Calvin? Tell me." We sat at the kitchen table, where she placed a steaming mug of tea and a plate of freshly baked cookies in front of me. I took a deep breath and pulled Dean's letter from my bag. "Mom, I have something to tell you," I began, my voice slightly shaky. "Yesterday I met a lawyer, Spencer Hale. He told me about someone named Dean Pembroke. He said he was my great-uncle." My mother froze, the mug of tea halting mid-air. Her eyes shimmered as if she'd heard a name from a distant past. "Dean?" she whispered, her voice faltering. "Dean. My brother?" Tears began to roll down her cheeks, and I saw her hands tremble as she set the mug down. I handed her the letter recounting my meeting with Spencer Hale, the will, and the vast fortune Dean had left me. I told her about the letter's words, how Dean had reunited with her after over 40 years of separation, how he had watched me and believed I was worthy of carrying on the Pembroke family spirit. My mother sat silently, listening to every word, tears streaming down her face. When I finished, she stood and walked to an old wooden box on the bookshelf. She opened it and pulled out a faded black and white photograph. In it, a young girl, my mother, just 18, stood beside a tall young man in a military uniform. He was smiling, his hand on her shoulder, his eyes bright with pride. "This is Dean," she said, her voice choked. "My brother. The day he left for the war, I was only 18. We got a death notice after a brutal battle. No one thought he was alive. I kept this photo for 40 years as a way to remember him." She shared the story of her past, her voice rising and falling as if reliving those days. Dean was the brother she admired, the one who protected her, who taught her how to tie her shoes and sing folk songs. When the war broke out, he volunteered, saying he wanted to do what was right for the country. After the death notice, the family was shattered, and my mother had to overcome her grief alone, raising me single-handedly after my father's death. "I never thought I'd see him again," she said, gently stroking the photo. "But a few months ago he showed up at my door in a simple suit. I looked at him, and after a few seconds of silence, I knew it was Dean. He hugged me, crying like a child, telling me about his years of memory loss, the nightmares from the war, and how he rebuilt his life from nothing." I listened, feeling as though I were uncovering a piece of family history I'd never known. My mother said Dean had spent an entire day at the wooden house, sitting by the fireplace recounting his journey, from a veteran who forgot his own name to a successful entrepreneur. He didn't talk much about his wealth, only that he wanted to do what was right, to make up for the lost years. "He asked about you, Calvin," she said, looking at me with tender eyes. "He wanted to know about the dentist I was so proud of. I told him about your clinic, your kindness, and he just smiled, saying you were the family's hope." I bowed my head, feeling a mix of pain and warmth. I was ashamed of the past months, living like a homeless man, too afraid to face her. But now, sitting in this familiar wooden house, I felt renewed strength. I told my mother the truth about my broken marriage, Lydia's accusations, and how I'd lost everything. She listened without judgment, holding my hand tightly, just as she did when I was a child. "You're my son," she said firmly, "and I know you're a good man. No matter what happens, you're still Calvin Pembroke, the one who always does what's right." That night, we sat by the fireplace, the crackling flames illuminating my mother's face, highlighting the lines etched by time. Outside, snow fell gently, blanketing the fields and the wooden house. I looked at the wall, where my mother had hung the old photo of her and Dean. In the dim light, I felt clearly that blood and kindness could transcend even war and time. I thought of Dean's will, the responsibility he entrusted to me, to care for my mother and help those forgotten by society. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel alone. I had my mother, Dean's memory, and a chance to start over. The days that followed in Maine were spent with my mother, savoring simple moments I thought I'd lost forever. We sat by the fireplace, ate her homemade cookies, and talked about small things. The Maine winter, the stories she told me when I was a child. But deep down I knew I couldn't stay forever. Dean's letter, along with Spencer Hale's instructions, burned like a quiet flame, urging me to act. I needed to go to Chicago, finalize the inheritance process, and face the responsibility Dean had entrusted to me. I wasn't sure I was ready, but I knew I could no longer run. After a few days of preparation, I said goodbye to my mother. She stood at the door of the wooden house, hugging me tightly, her eyes full of trust. "You'll do it, Calvin," she said, brushing my cheek. "I know you're a good man, just as Dean saw." I nodded, trying to hide the fear creeping into my heart. I climbed into the old pickup truck, the only possession left from my darkest days, and began the nearly 1,000-mile journey to Chicago. The road was long and quiet, with only the hum of the engine and old country songs crackling through the radio. I drove through Maine's snow-covered pine forests, past New Hampshire's small towns, and onto the wide highways leading to the heart of America. With each mile, I reflected on everything that had happened. My broken marriage, the accusations, the collapse of my reputation. But I also thought about what lay ahead. A chance to start over, to prove that Dean's faith in me wasn't misplaced. Chicago greeted me with glittering skyscrapers and the blare of car horns. I felt small in this vast city, like a lost soul from rural Vermont. Spencer Hale's office was in a sleek glass building with polished hallways and the cold hum of air conditioning. When I walked in, Spencer rose from a large wooden desk, offering a friendly but professional smile. "Calvin, you made it," he said, shaking my hand. "Please have a seat. We have a lot to go over." He led me to a small meeting room where light streamed through the window onto stacks of thick files. Spencer explained the inheritance process, contracts for transferring assets, shares in Dean's transportation company, and properties scattered across the U.S. "Everything's been meticulously prepared," he said, sliding a stack of documents toward me. "Sign here, and the process will begin. It may take a few weeks to finalize, but Dean's will is clear. You're the legal heir." I picked up the pen, my heart pounding. The numbers on the papers, tens of millions of dollars, company shares, real estate, made my head spin. I, Calvin Pembroke, who had been sleeping in a truck just days ago, was about to become the owner of a fortune I never dared to dream of. But as I prepared to sign, the meeting room door burst open and a sharp, cold voice cut through the air. "So this is the man who stole my inheritance." I looked up, my heart stopping. A tall man in a black suit strode in, his angular face and hostile eyes fixed on me. He appeared to be in his 30s. "Daniel Pembroke," he introduced himself, his voice like ice. "Dean Pembroke's son, and you," he pointed at me, "have taken what rightfully belongs to me." I was stunned, unable to speak. Daniel Pembroke? Dean's son? Dean's letter had mentioned a wayward son, but I never expected to meet him. Not here, not now. Spencer stood, his voice calm but firm. "Daniel, I've explained this to you. Your father's will is clear. Calvin is the legal heir." But before Daniel could respond, another figure stepped into the room, and it felt like the world collapsed again. Lydia, my ex-wife. She stood there in an elegant business dress, her eyes avoiding mine as if out of shame or fear. The air in the room grew thick with awkwardness and tension. I looked from Daniel to Lydia, then back to Daniel, trying to make sense of it all. Lydia, who had ruined my reputation, who took Eli away from me, now stood here, aligned with Dean's son. Were they allies? Since when? Daniel didn't give me time to process. He stepped forward, slamming his hand on the table, his voice dripping with anger. "This will is a joke. My father would never leave his fortune to a stranger like him." He pointed at me, his eyes burning with contempt. "Who are you? A failed dentist chased out of your own town, now trying to steal the Pembroke family fortune? I'll sue you, I'll drag this to court, and I'll take back what's mine." Lydia finally spoke, her voice soft but sharp. "Calvin, you shouldn't be doing this. You know this isn't your place." I looked at her, my heart aching. She who was once my wife, who once said she loved me, now stood here siding with a stranger against me. "Lydia," I said, my voice hoarse, "you know I'm not that person. Why are you doing this?" She turned away, silent. Daniel pressed on, his voice growing harsher. "Don't play the saint, Pembroke. I've heard about you. The wife abuser, the patient exploiter. You think you fooled my father, but I won't let you take what's mine." I wanted to shout, to say I wasn't the monster they claimed, that I'd never done anything wrong. But I remembered Dean's letter, his words about integrity, about not bowing to adversity. I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and signed the documents in front of me. "I didn't steal anything from anyone," I said, my voice slow but firm. "Dean chose me, and I will honor his wishes." Daniel scoffed, his eyes full of disdain. "Just wait, Pembroke. This isn't over." He turned and stormed out, Lydia following, not once looking back. The door slammed shut, leaving Spencer and me in heavy silence. Spencer placed a hand on my shoulder, his voice low. "There will be challenges, Calvin. Daniel won't give up easily, and with Lydia on his side, things will get complicated. But this time, you're not alone." I nodded, feeling a new strength within me. If I had fought to clear my name before, now I was fighting to protect Dean's legacy. A legacy of kindness and faith. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. I stayed temporarily in a small hotel arranged by Spencer, preparing for the court hearing that would determine the validity of Dean's will. The Illinois State Courthouse became a battlefield where I faced Daniel Pembroke and Lydia, once a part of my life, now standing on the opposing side. Spencer Hale, with the calm and sharpness of a seasoned lawyer, guided me through the legal maze. Daniel, on the other hand, was backed by an expensive team of lawyers, and Lydia, who used her PR skills to stir public pressure. Each day I read online articles with headlines like "$1 million estate dispute, nephew or biological son," and felt like I was living in a movie I never wanted to star in. The trial began on a cold morning in a courtroom with dark wooden walls and a heavy atmosphere. I sat beside Spencer, trying to maintain composure, but my heart pounded. Daniel sat across from me, his gaze icy, occasionally flicking toward me with undisguised contempt. Lydia sat beside him, dressed in an elegant business suit, but she avoided my eyes as if my gaze could burn her. The judge, an older woman with a stern face, banged her gavel to open the proceedings, and the battle began. Daniel's legal team struck first, accusing me of mentally manipulating Dean when he was frail, coercing him to alter his will to exclude Daniel. They painted me as an opportunist, a failed dentist from Vermont who exploited an old man's kindness to steal his fortune. Calvin Pembroke had no prior relationship with Mr. Dean Pembroke, Daniel's lawyer declared, his voice resolute. How could a stranger with no knowledge of the family be chosen as the sole heir? This is clearly irregular. I clenched my fists under the table, my blood boiling. I wanted to stand and shout that I didn't even know Dean until the letter arrived, that I hadn't asked for anything. But Spencer placed a hand on my shoulder, whispering, "Stay calm, Calvin. Let me handle this." And he did. Spencer countered with a sharpness I hadn't anticipated. He presented Dean's medical records, proving he was fully lucid when drafting the will. He called a witness, Dean's doctor, who confirmed that Dean had recovered his memory and made his decision with clarity. But the decisive blow came from a video Spencer had kept secret until the last moment. In it, Dean, though frail, sat in a brightly lit room, looking directly at the camera and speaking in a steady, resolute voice. "I, Dean Pembroke, make this will with full awareness. I choose my nephew, Calvin Pembroke, as my heir because he carries the spirit of our family. kindness, and integrity. My son Daniel has disappointed me. I do not want my estate to fall into the hands of those driven by greed." The courtroom fell silent. I glanced at Daniel, his face pale, his hands clenched tightly. Lydia bowed her head, lips pressed tight. But Spencer wasn't done. He produced further evidence. Financial records showing that Daniel had siphoned millions from Pembroke Logistics investment funds to cover personal debts, from gambling to lavish loans. Then, as a final blow, Spencer revealed that Lydia had aided Daniel by legitimizing fake assets and funneling money through offshore accounts to conceal the fraud. These legally verified documents stripped Daniel and Lydia of all credibility in court. The subsequent days of the trial were a nightmare for Daniel and Lydia. Their witnesses, mostly paid to speak in Daniel's favor, contradicted themselves, while Spencer's evidence stood firm as stone. I sat there, listening to every word, feeling as though my life was being laid bare before everyone. At times I looked at Lydia, hoping for a trace of remorse, but she only bowed her head, avoiding my gaze. Finally, after days of tension, the judge banged her gavel and delivered the verdict. The court upholds the legal validity of Mr. Dean Pembroke's will. Calvin Pembroke is the lawful heir to the entire estate, including the company, shares, and real estate. Daniel Pembroke and related parties have no legal claim in this matter. I sat still, feeling as though a weight had been lifted from my chest. Spencer patted my shoulder, smiling. "Congratulations, Calvin. You did it." But the victory wasn't as sweet as I'd imagined. Daniel left the courtroom with a look of seething resentment, while Lydia, for the first time, met my eyes, her gaze a complex mix of shame and anger. The fallout came swiftly. Daniel's company, already on the brink, officially went bankrupt. Articles began exposing his fraudulent dealings, and the name Daniel Pembroke became the target of public criticism. Lydia, once a star in the PR world, was shunned by the media. The powerful friends who had once supported her in smearing me now distanced themselves. From a woman living in the spotlight, she became a shadow of herself, pushed to the margins of the elite society she once craved. On the final day of the trial, as I prepared to leave the courtroom, Lydia suddenly appeared, with Eli in tow. My son, now slightly taller, looked at me with clear but confused eyes. "Dad!" he cried, running to hug me. I knelt down, holding him tightly, feeling as though my heart had come back to life. But Lydia pulled him back, her voice trembling. "Calvin, we need to talk." She stood there, her face weary, no longer carrying the confidence she once had. "I was wrong," she said softly. "I listened to Daniel, let him manipulate me. Now he's lost everything, and I don't know what to do. For Eli's sake, please help us." I looked at her, then at Eli, who clung to his mother's hand, his eyes bewildered. Part of me wanted to forgive, to help her for our son's sake. But then I remembered the accusations, the nights I slept in my truck, the days I was shunned by the town. "Lydia," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "if you truly care about Eli, let him stay with me. I can give him the stability and love he needs. You know that." Lydia stepped back, her eyes flashing with anger. "You can't take Eli from me," she snapped, her voice breaking. She grabbed Eli's hand, pulling him out of the courtroom, tears streaming down her face. I stood there, watching their figures disappear, my heart heavy. I knew I had done the right thing, but the pain of losing Eli still felt like an unhealed wound. Chicago, with its towering skyscrapers and frenetic pace, was not a place for me. After the trial, I withdrew from the media spotlight, declining every interview request from curious newspapers. I wanted to return to Maine, to my mother, to the quiet of grassy fields and the sound of waves crashing. I drove my old pickup truck, now a loyal companion, along the long highways, leaving behind the noise of the legal battle. When I arrived at my mother's wooden house in Maine, she was waiting on the porch as if she'd sensed my return. "My son," she said, hugging me tightly, "I knew you'd make it." I told her about the verdict, how the court recognized me as Dean's rightful heir. But I also shared about Lydia, about Eli, about the moment he hugged me in the courtroom. My mother held my hand, her eyes gentle but resolute. "You'll find Eli again, Calvin." But first you need to find yourself." Her words were like a soft breeze soothing my weary and wounded soul. I decided not to stay in the old wooden house despite its cherished memories. With Dean's fortune, I bought a new home by the Maine coast, where my mother could see the ocean every morning, where the air was fresh and the sound of waves was like a lullaby. The house wasn't extravagant, but it was spacious enough for her comfort, with a small garden where she could grow flowers and a large fireplace to warm the winter nights. I moved in with her, spending the first days recovering my spirit, rediscovering the peaceful rhythm I'd lost. Each morning I woke early, made coffee for my mother, and we sat on the porch watching the sunrise. "See, Calvin," she said, pointing to the sea, "life always finds a way to bring light back." Eli remained the greatest void in my heart. I contacted lawyers to fight for custody, but the legal process was slow and Lydia still refused to let me see him. I sent gifts to Eli, picture books he loved, superhero toys, but received no response. Each night I sat in my room looking at the photo of him on my shoulders, promising myself I wouldn't give up. "Wait for me, son," I whispered. "Dad will find you." But I didn't let that pain drag me down. I had a promise to keep to Dean, not just to care for my mother, but to use his wealth to help those forgotten by society. I founded the Dean Pembroke Foundation, named in his honor to celebrate his spirit. The foundation focused on supporting veterans, orphans, and those living on society's margins, as I once had. I recruited a team of volunteers, from passionate young students to veterans eager to give back. We partnered with small hospitals and schools in Maine, launching free dental care programs for children and the elderly. I stood in makeshift clinics, watching kids beam as they saw their new teeth in the mirror, and it felt like I was reliving my days at Pembroke Dental when kindness was all I needed. With my honor restored, I decided to return to dentistry, but on my own terms. I opened a nonprofit dental clinic in Maine, not far from my mother's new home. The clinic was small, much like Pembroke Dental once was, but this time I wasn't just fixing teeth. I was training young dental students who wanted to serve communities rather than chase profits. I told them about Dean, his journey from a memoryless veteran to a successful entrepreneur, and how he chose kindness as his legacy. "Do what's right," I told them, because that's the only way to live without regret. As the months passed in Maine, I slowly rediscovered myself. I wrote a short letter to local newspapers, not to boast about my victory, but to share what I'd learned from my darkest days. "The truth can be buried, but it doesn't die," I wrote. "It's like a small flame needing only a spark to blaze again." Honor isn't bought with money. It's built through every act of kindness, no matter how small. Forgiveness isn't weakness, it's the final step to freedom. And don't live to prove others wrong. Live to prove that a person can rise after being destroyed. I sent the letter, not expecting it to change the world, but hoping it might touch someone, as Dean's letter had touched me. Each day I worked at the clinic, supported the foundation, and spent time with my mother. I called Eli every week, though Lydia often didn't answer. But sometimes I heard his voice on the voicemail, and that alone gave me a reason to keep going. One evening, as I sat by the fireplace in the new house, my mother walked in, carrying an old wooden box. She opened it and pulled out the black and white photo of her and Dean. "Keep this," she said, smiling. "Let it remind you that our family is always strong no matter what happens." I took the photo, running my fingers over it, feeling a warm current in my heart. I was no longer the outcast. I was Calvin Pembroke, carrying the spirit of my family, and I would live to do what was right, as my father had, as my mother did, as Dean had done. 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 Dean had done.